Good morning, good morning, everyone. I think it's morning for most of the country still. My name's Lindsay. I'm the interim executive director for Equal Voice, and we're just going to wait a minute as I see people joining the webinar, and then we will get started right away. So we'll just give it one more minute. We had over 400 registrations, so we're hoping to see a few people on this one. I guess budgets are a very exciting topic in the middle of summer, right before the long weekend. So we're excited for this session. Still climbing. Oh, so just a couple of housekeeping items. We're asking anyone to put their questions in the question chat option within uh, the Zoom link, as well as there's a chat. Basil will be monitoring the chat to be able to help if anyone's got issues or additional questions, but we encourage you to put any questions in the chat and we'll try and get to as many of them as possible at the end. We're looking forward to dialogue on what it takes as an elected official to build a budget, both at a federal and provincial level. We're really excited for this discussion because as everyone knows, or at least those of us who are somewhat politically wonky, we tend to follow when budgets are made, announce consultations, and hopefully this will provide some clarity and some behind the scenes as to what it takes in the role of being an elected official to run a budget, create a budget, and manage. So, with that, it looks like we're still climbing. But I'm going to get started just because we are on a bit of a time. Uh, we have some constrained times, and I know it is the summer. With that, I'm going to just take a quick moment to thank our panelists, who are MP Karina Gould for Burlington, and she also serves as the chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. She's been a known name for quite a few years at the federal level. Welcome. And then we have MPP Michelle Cooper from Eglinton Lawrence and is Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Finance from Ontario. So thank you both very much for being here. Because we're on a time crunch, I'm not going to read their full bios, but they were in the emails and on the website as panelists. So you're welcome to read all about their accolades and all the amazing things they've done in their careers over the last few years. So, with the purpose of this panel and discussion and Women Talking Policy, the goal is to talk about um, what it looks like behind the scenes when you are in elected office. So people learn, and women and gender diverse individuals who are maybe seeking office better understand what the job entails and how to govern and govern well. And so that there's less surprises when they're successful in their runs when they get into the role. So, as we all know, budgets don't appear out of thin air. They come from a lot of preparation and diligence. And so, let's start. Most media and Canadians, they look at budgets and they're these big documents that kind of get delivered. For example, the Standing Committee on Finance and Parliamentary Secretary roles are not exactly part of dinner table conversations when people are talking about politics or considering getting into this, but they play a really critical role in how budgets are developed and how consultation and engagement with stakeholders are done. So, MP Gould, could you maybe just start with giving us an overview of the House Standing Committees on Finance, your role as chair, what it does, and why it's important?
Sure, happy to. First of all, thank you, Lindsay, so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And thanks to everybody who's joining it. I saw that Maria from Burlington is here, so it's always nice to have a constituent. So welcome. The House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance has one main purpose, and that is to review all of the money legislation that comes through the House of Commons. But one of the things that I've learned more in the past year in this role is that we're also responsible for monitoring banking and financial services in Canada as well, which is a federal responsibility. And so that's been kind of an interesting new area that I'm learning more about. I'm not an expert in that area, but I'm quickly becoming one, particularly when it comes to everything that has to do with cryptocurrency and fintech. We're getting a lot of applications and interest about how Canada can both protect and preserve the really strong financial system that we have, but also modernize it in a way that works for Canadians in the 21st century. So, um, we at the Standing Committee on Finance review every money bill that comes through the House of Commons. So, whether that is a Budget Implementation Act, whether it's the Spring Economic Statement, or whether it's a bill like C4 that has a tax change, like removing the GST for first-time home buyers on new builds, all of that comes through the Finance Committee. So we are probably the most active and busiest committee that you have on Parliament Hill. Sometimes typically a House committee will sit about 4 hours a week, 2 2 hour sessions. The House of Commons Finance Committee is often sitting, you know, 4 times a week, sometimes 4 6 8 12 hours a sitting because we have a lot of work to get through. But it is for me, it has been so interesting because you get a complete overview of everything the government is doing because everything has to go through a budget bill. And so you really get to see what the priorities of a government are, and you really get to kind of dig deep into those decisions. Then, of course, every parliamentary committee should technically be looking at the main estimates as well for each department. Often, what people don't realize is that the number one job of a parliamentarian is actually to scrutinize government spending. And that is a big part of the work that we do. And so it's really interesting to go through a Budget Implementation Act, which is the enabling legislation for the budget, which is a communications document that goes through line by line in terms of what the government is spending. And then at finance, there's a couple of things that we do to facilitate and enable us to do this. One of it is that we will, and we are actually mandated in the standing orders through Parliament to hold pre-budget consultations. So, because the current government has changed the budget cycle and the budget is now in the fall as opposed to the spring, we've just gone through my first pre-budget consultation cycle as chair of finance, where we heard from over 80 witnesses on topics as to what they would like to see in the budget. Then over the summer, as parliamentarians, we are going through all of those recommendations and we're going to put that then I'm going to present when the House comes back to the government to help inform them about what we think should be in the budget. But that also informs, are they responding to the view the budget through it? We can kind of identify where we think some of those gaps are. It's a lot of work, but it's really interesting and exciting about it is that
I think we might have just had a glitch with the internet.
did you
Sorry.
did you lose me?
Just
Sorry.
briefly at
Okay.
the end.
Oh, okay. So no, I just think it's what's really exciting about it is that we really get an overview of the entire country, every sector, and can really, be informed about what the government should be doing and is doing.
Great. Thank you. MPP Cooper, I saw you nodding your head while she was speaking. Maybe people might not understand what a parliamentary assistant, to the Minister of Finance does in this role. Maybe you could comment on your role and if it's a similar type process at the provincial level.
So thank you for having me here today. And yeah, a lot of people do ask, what's a parliamentary assistant? What role does it play? So in the Ministry of Finance in Ontario, it plays a very important role because, as you're aware, finance is a big, it's a big ministry. It encompasses everything. It's a bird's eye view on everything. So I was appointed by Premier Doug Ford to support our cabinet minister, Peter Bethlenfalvy. And, in this role, I do look after key files. So I know MP Gould was talking about some of the things that they oversee, but from my perspective, the files I do oversee are things, and we do have another parliamentary assistant here as well that has other files. So some of the key files that I do look after are under FESRA, which is a regulatory body. So things like credit unions, insurance, mortgage brokers, the Ontario Securities Commission. So that whole chunk, it's a lot of very important work, and I do engage with all the key stakeholders and attend events and speak on behalf of the minister and the ministry in these areas, and bring all that information back to the ministry and the minister, and have conversations on those files. I also have a legislative responsibilities as well. So during question period or debates, if the minister is not there, I'm the one that is there answering those questions on behalf of our government and the ministry. So, leading key priority projects and initiatives, engaging with a lot of stakeholders, as well as part of the budget process and the pre-budget consultation process. So in this role, there's a lot of work to be done, and each and every day I'm here working on these important files.
Great, thank you. So I think there's some similarities between, credit unions and banking and insurance and the different tools within finance budgets, and the finance processes are not just setting a budget. We know that budgets, we often hear about them in the news, but I often tell people in my work that a government's priority, if there isn't a budget line item, then maybe it's not quite such a priority, which is the reason why consultations in the process and it's so robust is so important. Could you walk us through the process? How do priorities get set for a budget? Before you even go out to consultation, you must have some ideas of what your government's priorities are. Not to talk about any specific one, but like, how does that conversation start? And then how do you bring stakeholders to bring in and be part of those consultations and hear from your constituents and Canadians or Ontarians on setting that process in order to develop a budget? MP Gould, maybe you could start, since you said you just went through your very first spring consultation period.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's my first as chair of finance, but I'm going on 11 years in Parliament, and of course 10 years or 9 years as a cabinet minister. So it I think at least for us, and I'm sure every government and party is slightly different in terms of how they manage things, but I think you can look at least for us at the federal liberal level, is that you can tend to look at what our party platform was in the previous election to see where those priorities are going to be coming from. Often a party platform has more in it than you can do in a single budget, and so it might be a different budget cycle. And so just because it isn't in budget in year one doesn't mean it might not be in year three or year four. And then it also depends on what's going on in the country. If you I'll go back to 2015, right? In 2015, we had a very strong platform. And then in 2016, Donald Trump was elected, and the economy changed quite drastically with the steel and aluminum tariffs and the renegotiation of NAFTA. And so you kind of have to adjust to what's going on in the country and in the world at the time, in addition to what you ran on in the election. But there's kind of multiple tracks that happen. So at the federal level, both the government and the finance committee do pre-budget consultations. Members of parliament do pre-budget consultations in their local communities as well. And all of that information gets fed into Finance Canada for them to decide what they're going to be focused on. And both the minister and the parliamentary secretary are leading consultations as well. At the Finance Committee, we get about 2,000 submissions every year in terms of what individuals, groups, and stakeholders are looking for. But oftentimes you get some themes because there are trends that are happening in the economy and in society. And so you can kind of pull those threads out. There are always unique asks as well. But really, it's about going out to Canadians and hearing from them what their priorities are. We also hear at the federal level from provinces, from municipalities, as well as to what their priorities are, and those are also factored in. So I'm sure at the recent FPT meeting, the Federal Provincial Territorial meeting, the premiers made clear to the Prime Minister what their asks were for the upcoming federal budget, because provinces also determine their budgets based on what the federal government is doing, because it'll depend what they're going to have their spending priorities on. Do they align? Do they not align, etc. So there's a lot that goes in every year, and really, as you wrap up one budget cycle, the next one really begins.
Thank you. MPP Cooper, what's it
It's
like at the Ontario level or the
it's
provincial level?
provincial level, it's very similar. So I went through my first budget cycle last year to create the spring budget. So that kicked off in November, and I was on the road until I think I had a deadline of the end of January to travel this province. I heard 14 pre-budget submissions. I held 14 pre-budget consultations from Kincardine to Sarnia. We had two in Toronto, but Newmarket, Aurora, Thunder Bay. It was minus 44 when I got to Thunder Bay in January, and heard from tons of folks around the province. We also we did a total of 35 pre-budget consultations. Myself, the other PA, the minister, and also we received over 1,000 online submissions, as well as over 12,000 survey responses. So, the pre-budget consultation process was really fascinating and interesting. I say it's a bit like a quick speed dating because, you hear from so many people in such a short period of time. And, we take everything in. And just like MP Gould said, there becomes common themes that you hear. So at first everything's new, but as you travel the province, you hear the common themes and what different stakeholders, different constituents in different areas, and regional concerns as well. So, and the regional needs. And the province is really vast, Ontario, and we need to take all that back in, and we need to consider everything when we look at the budget and the different areas, the different ministry needs and asks, and also budgetary and financial pieces as well. So it is quite an interesting process. There's also AMO, and I know I will be in AMO, which is about the municipalities of Ontario. We hear from, we have 444 municipalities here in Ontario, and we sit down with a whole number of them when we do go to AMO, which is in the coming weeks in Ottawa. And it is really fascinating. I was there last year, and I will be there in a couple of weeks, hearing from the needs of different municipalities. And so it's about how do we fit in all these needs into the budget. I always go back to, we do have one taxpayer, and it's about and that is trying to figure out how we can meet the needs of everybody in this budget. and being fiscally responsible as well in those needs.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is you do a broad breadth. So there was a couple of questions quickly about how to get involved in the process. So I've seen emails, I've seen website, I've seen social media where governments are seeking feedback and presenting opportunities. You're listening to industry, you're listening to municipalities and community, you're listening to your own departments that need different things, you're listening to your party platforms and goals, and to a changing global international realm. This is a very complex, the numbers you're throwing out about the number of people that you're engaging with in different groups. There's got to be trade-offs. Michelle, you mentioned about, one taxpayer and fiscally responsible. There is obviously never, just like every household and every person, there's never enough money for everything. Can you talk a little bit, maybe you have an anecdote or story about the trade-offs when you're going through this process, how that thinking and those discussions happen? Um, MPP Cooper, do you want to start this time? Do you have an example?
You know what? There is sometimes trade-offs, and I will tell you, I remember sitting through one of the consultations, and you know what? There's so many stories and so many needs, and at one point, I actually had to take a breather and say, "Wow, you know what, these are a lot of things, like, you want to be able to meet all these needs, and you sometimes think to yourself, how do we do this? Like, it's incredible because you know what there's so many heart-wrenching stories that I've heard and so many amazing ideas, and but you know what, there are priorities of ministries, there's priorities of government, but then there's, I want to say, you throw the wrench into it, like, we have the tariffs and the Trump, what's going on there, and so things kind of take. It's not just a straight path. It's sometimes curveballs are thrown your way, and so you think you're going in this direction, but all of a sudden we gotta move over to accommodating other businesses after you hear, not businesses, but stakeholders, businesses, organizations, associations, constituents, and figure out where everybody kind of fits into this. And it is complex. And, sometimes you can't make everybody happy and in this process, but you just got to try your hardest and your best to make this right for everybody here in Ontario, because, well, I'm just talking for my own province, but it is not. Difficult decisions need to be done, so made, and sometimes there are trade-offs in the process. But we need to keep our economy going, and we need to make our economy strong and provide jobs and business, and that's what keeps things going here. And so we try our hardest every day.
MP Gould, do you have examples of trade-offs or hard with all your years of experience?
Yeah, well, so I would say is at the finance committee, it's a little bit different because they're not making the decisions in terms of what's being funded and what's not. They're reviewing those funding decisions. So it's a bit of a different experience than if you're the Minister of Finance or in the government or the PA or PS to finance. But what I would say is that to govern is to choose. And so it really is about defining what those priorities are, and understanding what you feel and believe to be the most important issue at the time, because you can't fund everything with the resources that you have at your disposal. And even still, most governments end up spending more than what they bring in and running a deficit. And they're still making choices. And still not funding everything that everyone would like them to fund. And so I think it really depends on the moment and what those priorities are. During COVID, for example, at the federal level, it was keeping the economy going. We spent a lot on things like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. I mean, literally hundreds of billions of dollars on those so that when the economy could reopen, there was an economy to reopen, in addition to obviously, the health emergency that existed. So it really depends on what is happening, and what the most urgent thing to fund is. But then also having a long-term vision to ensure that you're not creating a shortfall somewhere else that's going to become urgent or an emergency later on. So it's never easy. There are tough decisions that have to be made all the time. And there are always groups that are disappointed because there's only so much money to go around.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot slightly. So, part of the reason why we wanted to have this conversation with you and talk about budgets and fiscal responsibilities within the government is women are too often pigeonholed into what's considered women issues. And it's not the financial pieces or trade or the economy or jobs. And just you're both strong examples of women holding, serious positions, important positions in your government. What do you bring to the table in the process as women? What lens, has it made a difference? Have you felt like you've been able to make a difference in these roles? Do you have any sort of inspiration for what it means to have more women, not just elected, but also in these different positions across the processes of government? MP Gould, do you want to maybe start this time?
Sure. So, I mean, whether it's gender or race or religion or age, the more diverse elected officials we have, the better policies we get because we bring everybody's perspective and experience into it. And, when you are governing, you are not just governing for one segment of society, you are governing for everyone. And so it's good to have as many different diverse perspectives as possible to get the best policy outcomes that include everybody in them and think about everybody. And certainly, I was elected when I was 28 for the first time, and I became a cabinet minister when I was 29. And it really hit home for me when I was in some of my first cabinet meetings that if I wasn't there, there wasn't really anyone speaking up for young women and young mothers at the cabinet table. It wasn't that they were doing it intentionally. It's just that they were at a different point in their lives and they weren't necessarily thinking about the experiences and the impact of policies on that demographic. And so I just think it's great to have as many diverse voices in leadership roles in positions of power to ensure that we're considering everybody at those times. I on the other hand, too, it's really good to not pigeonhole people because everybody comes with a diverse background. But I specifically asked to be on finance after the last election because I wanted to demonstrate that I also have a strong economic background and not just a social background because I kind of had been in roles that were more female oriented, if you will, which I loved, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, being the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development was a dream job for me, and being able to implement the Canada-wide early learning and childcare initiative, I don't think I could reach a more important or exciting opportunity and policy objective. Like, I literally went into politics in 2015 wanting universal childcare, and now that we're on that path, I'm beyond excited about it. Um, but I also wanted to be able to demonstrate that I can do the other side of the ledger as well. And there's only been one or two female chairs of the finance committee before me in our entire 150-year history or 150 plus year history in Canada. So we need to make sure that we have that diversity. And, my objective is always that at some point we're not like, she's the first or second ever. It's just that there's, as many women as there were men in these positions, and we don't even have to think about it or applaud these firsts anymore.
MPP Cooper, what are your thoughts?
So, in my role as parliamentary assistant, this is the first time a female has been in this role in our government. And so I was really honored when I was appointed to this role. I agree wholeheartedly. It shouldn't be first at this point. There's 19 members, female members of our government here in Ontario, and just you know what? I think sometimes women are not as either engaged in politics or feel that they can make the decision to be an elected like to be a politician, because they're juggling so many things. They're juggling family, they're juggling, careers, and they feel like this may not be something of a dream. But you know what? I always say to everybody, if you work hard, I do speak to lots of women's groups. I speak to a lot of girls' schools, which is one of the highlights I've had in this role is going to some all girls schools, and it's just you see in their faces like an inspiration that this is doable, this is achievable. And I always say with hard work you can achieve anything. And I know sometimes it's a struggle between your children and your family, and this isn't an easy job. It really isn't. It is. We were just talking beforehand that this is 7 days a week job. So it does take some juggling and to make it happen. But it is something that every single person, no matter what your background, no matter where you've come from, that you can strive to and be. Putting your name on a ballot, it's not an easy choice, and so just in people electing you to be here. So I'm honored to be in this position. I'm honored to be in this role, as a female, as a woman, and just representing. And so, it's exciting every day. And, but it also gives me a voice at the table and to represent, women, and bring that voice. It's a little bit different sometimes. It just creates that diversity and at the table. So, honored to be here and to represent.
Thank you. So I'm going to just wrap up with sort of one last question before we get to the Q&A in the chat. But we were talking earlier about, learning some of these roles, and I think you both made mention about how you've had to learn as you get posted into these positions. So what do you wish more women running for office understood about how fiscal processes and decisions actually get made? And what do you wish you had known? What piece of advice or tidbit or thing did you wish you had known before you took on these responsibilities in each of your roles? I'll leave it up to either one of you to maybe start with.
So I'll jump in. So I'll tell you that there's no roadmap here. You wake up the day after you're elected and you're like, I'm an MPP now. Like, where do I go? What do I do? Where's the training? Where's this? You know what? It's just, they throw you in. There's, you have to be on the ball learning as you go. I wish there was this roadmap that showed me the direction and the way, but you just get up and go. So that's, in hindsight looking back, but, through this process, it's a learning every day. I say that every day is completely different. You meet so many different people, with so many different ideas and with so many different needs. And so it's just really having an open mind every single day and hearing from them and hearing their voice and trying to understand their need greater. And some people think, oh, you're listening to me. Are you a doctor? I'm like, no, I never said I was in this role. But I'm here to listen to you and advocate and try to help and try to understand what you're trying to get across to government. So it's just having a very open mind and just learning and being open and being able to pivot as you go. So, and being nimble. That's really key things that someone could have pointed out. But each and every day is so exciting and so different and educational.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Michelle. I mean, 11 years in and I'm still learning something new every day or coming across a tricky situation that I haven't encountered and have to try to help someone navigate through. So it's really interesting. I think with regards to like the fiscal system in general, um, is that it's not like there is a set template as to how someone is going to make a decision or why. And so from my perspective, I think it's really important whether you're a parliamentarian or whether you're a stakeholder or an individual, is that you really have to make the case for why something should be funded. And you can't just do it once. Like the thing that I always tell stakeholders or people interested in getting involved or new colleagues is that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. Like you can't assume because you've sent one email, it's done. You can't assume that because you spoke to somebody once that it's going to happen. And so if it's something you really care about, you're going to have to work at it. And I'll take childcare as an example because um, you know, we have been advocating for universal childcare in Canada for 6 decades, right? Um, and yet it took like the exact right moment with the right people in place to make it happen. And it wasn't that people didn't think it was a laudable objective. They just didn't think that it was one that it was either going to be politically expedient or economically viable. And, at the kind of during the pandemic, all of a sudden you had all of these employers that were realizing that, oh my gosh, if parents have to look after their children, they can't really work. Like it's really hard to do both. And so all of a sudden you had this moment where you had the work that the advocates and the activists have been doing for 55 plus years. And then you had the business community and you had the right governments in place to make it happen. And so, don't give up on it. You have to keep pushing and advocating and arguing and talking to people. And sometimes it's just about the right moment. Like I remember Paul Martin in 2016 had his portrait unveiling. And I'm going to paraphrase him, but he said, you can get more done in politics in 5 minutes than you can on 50 years on the outside. But the moment has to meet, right? And so I think it's just you have to keep pushing and advocating and not giving up on the thing that you care about. And then learning too, right? As you're talking to people, what is the argument that worked? What didn't resonate? How do I change? How do I pivot? And also, am I still pursuing this in the right way, or is there something that I need to learn to make it better? So, um, yeah, just don't think that like once is enough. You got to keep at it.
Yep.
MPP Cooper, were you going to add to that?
I agree with that. Yeah, and the other thing is government is slow. You know what? I come from the business world, and it's like I could throw 100 things at the wall and keep going, 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 and we'll get them all done. Here, it's a whole other. When I first came in, it is a slow process thing to get things done. So, but you're right. You got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing because yeah, don't assume ever. I never use that word assume, but that people are reading things or doing things after you've hung up the phone or sent them an email. So absolutely.
I often tell people, elected officials are thinking, when you meet with them, they're thinking about their last meeting or conversation for the first 2 or 3 minutes. Then they get into yours, and then they're starting to think about the next one that they have because it's bang, bang, bang all the time. And there is part of the consultations in the process is understanding it so that you know how to then work this. It's going to sound terrible, but work the system to MP Gould's comment about did this land? Is this working? But also, in our campaign and training, we tell women when they're looking to run, you need to understand your why, but then also pay attention to everybody else's concerns and priorities but not lose your why at the same time, because that timing and process and moment can come in different times, or you never know when it's going to come. But then being able to take advantage of it. And by being around that table, you have that leverage or that opportunity to move those things forward. So we have just a few more minutes left before we need to wrap up at 10 too. Um, so there's a couple of questions from the chat that I'm just going to quickly ask you. Uh, so one of the questions, and this is a good one, different parties and governments seem to use different basic numbers. Are there any rules that you have to follow so that people understand budgets and able to compare them the same way? Any comments on that one? I know it's a common question, but I figure both of you have heard it before, so maybe you can provide a little insight.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a perennial challenge, I would say, in Canada because each government maybe defines things slightly differently. There are norms that an organization like the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, would put out for parliaments and governments to follow, as well as like the International Monetary Fund, as well. But there's no rule, right, in terms of how it has to be done. And so that can make it a bit tricky to compare, year over year, and between governments, what their fiscal situation is. Of course, at the federal level, we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who is an officer of Parliament who like kind of evaluates the budgets of each government and would try to help particularly it's really for parliamentarians to understand what the fiscal situation is and what that means in comparison to previous years and what that means in comparison to international standards. But there's no like hard rule that a government needs to follow. And then you'll also see that budgets have started to look very different over the years as well. They at one point were more of like an actual financial update, whereas now they're a bit more of a communications document. So it really depends, and it's up to each government to decide how they're going to do that. Of course, they have to follow like accounting practices, which is really important.
Um, Absolutely. I mean, we have economists here and financial analysts. We come up with our fiscal outlook, and that's what's in the budget. In our last budget, our spring budget, it is we set out like the path to balance in Ontario. So we want to give Ontarians and what that economic outlook looks like. What's the plan that the government has to get there. And so that's really important for us to communicate, and that's what's in the budget. And then in the fall, we do the fall economic statement, which is kind of the update as to, when that budget ends. I've been here in finance and went through two budgets, and it's you think it's a sign of relief. We've now delivered the spring budget, but we wake up the next morning and we're already working on the fall economic statement. So there's no kind of like, we're going to take a breather here. We are working hard already on fall. So and when the fall economic statement, after it's delivered, the spring is already starting. So we are always in budget mode, I would say, here, and just a real importance to getting to a path to balance is important for this government.
So I'm kind of skimming some of the questions, but just listening to your answers, it's a bit of an iterative process and constantly going. So there have been questions about, how people get their briefs, how do they get in person, how the trade-offs are working. There's quite a few questions in the chat about that. And I think you both have sort of tried to address those in your remarks previously. But one of the interesting questions I saw on this is around trade-offs is where do governments treaty obligations, so engaging with First Nations, play into like party priorities and government priorities. This is something that's always going on. And we were talking about diverse voices and, a gender lens on budgets and what we bring. Is there any um, maybe insights to how this process works, or is it the same process? Is it the same input? The same, funnels for getting those priorities put in? Is there a different weighting, maybe just generally amongst stakeholders or different things that you could shed some light on, or is it sort of an equal opportunity across the board? Do you have any insights or comments on that?
Sure, maybe I could jump in. So I'll just take a little bit of the question with regards to, how do you get into a consultation or either in person or brief? I mean, the web portals are open at the federal level, so just submit. I think that's important. When it came to the Finance Committee, we had our portal open in April and May, and then we get requests from people who want to present in person. So we both get written submissions, and then we would also get, specific people who have requested to come in person. But then each political party and each member of the committee will submit their list of witnesses that they would like to see in person. And we give those to the clerks, and then the clerks put it together. And as chair, I tried to organize it thematically this year so that, when we had an hour of 4 or 5 witnesses, they were all on housing, right? Or they were all on trade affected sectors, or they were all on women's issues, just to try to help us as committee members kind of organize our own thoughts as well, because previously you might get 4 or 5, but it's all different, right? And so just to try to organize that a little bit, I saw a question about, as an NGO, should we, or a not-for-profit, submit together or separately? You can do both. It's nice when the sector comes with a coordinated and consolidated ask, because it's cleaner, and it's easier for the government to receive. But not the sectors don't always agree on things either, right? So it's kind of up to you. But the more coordinated an ask, I think the more likely it is to come through, and then you need to talk to as many people as possible. When it comes to First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, Inuit, um, it's a bit of both, right? So there is, on the one hand, a unique process because the federal government has a unique and specific obligation to Indigenous peoples in Canada. And over the past decade in particular, there has been a very big and important change in terms of, Indigenous-led funding. And so there's been a big like devolution, if you will, of funding specifically to Indigenous peoples and communities and nations across the country. But on the other hand, the federal government also has Indigenous Services Canada. They have Crown Indigenous Relations, 2 departments that provide services to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And so there's the one hand where they will be part of the general um, pre-budget consultations, but then there would also be Indigenous specific consultations. So it's a bit of both, if you will. As chair of finance, I made a particular point of ensuring that we invited each of um, uh, the Indigenous led groups to come and present and submit. But even within that, there are, different Indigenous organizations that would be applying to different federal departments. So it's a little bit of both. There's particular specific constitutional obligations that the federal government has that would be unique. But then there's also more of a participating in the general consultations as well.
Thank you.
So I will say it's quite similar process provincially here in Ontario. So you anybody can go online. You can go to ontario.ca and hit budget consultations, and It's an open portal, and you can submit your pre-budget consult. You can submit your what your ask is. So everything is compiled in there. So that's where I would say people do go to. You can certainly speak to your local MPP as well. Things are also submitted through the ministries, so all the different ministries as well. We do consult with First Nations, absolutely, on everything that we do. They're actually early on in the process, so that because they are consulting with their specific ministry, so those things get boiled up as well into finance and into the budget process. And I'll give you an example. I was in Thunder Bay for my pre-budget consultation, and we did have, First Nations show up and pitch to the ministry. So there's a whole variety of ways to do this. The consultation process, it is very open and easily accessible. And if anybody has any issues, by to access those means or those ways. You can submit something online, go to a local MPP. Everybody is here to help to make this easy, because we really want to hear from everybody, because every voice is important, and we want to make sure these budgets reflect people in, I can say Ontario, and I know Karina can say overall in Canada. So that's really important to us as governments.
Great. Well, I'm just conscious of time. I know one of our panelists needs to depart a few minutes, but I just going to wrap things up by saying thank you very much for sharing your time, sharing behind the scenes, sharing your experiences, and a bit, sometimes learning about the process is a little easier when you hear about it from a real life perspective than trying to read it in a textbook about here's step one, step two, steps two, three as you're going through a website and trying to figure out the role. So just first of all, thank you very much on behalf of Equal Voice and everyone here today for your time, your insights, and sharing. I'm going to just kind of wrap up with a few housekeeping things from Equal Voice. I saw some questions about how to stay involved. There was a question about supporting each other. There was a question about women over 40 getting involved with Equal Voice. Please check out our website, sign up for our newsletter. We have different initiatives. This is just one of them. We have training and programs. They're not just for youth. It's actually for women of all ages. Believe it or not, we just did our results, and over 50% of our campaign school trainees this last year, about 50%, were over the age of 40. So if you're looking for a mid-career transition, maybe politics is for you, and we would encourage you to consider running. There's a lot of municipal elections happening across the country this year, and it's a great way to stay involved in your community. But check us out for our different resources and research. I will say Equal Voice for the first time in many years actually submitted as part of the federal pre-budget consultations. That was quite the process. I have to admit we were on a bit of a learning curve ourselves. But there's various ways to stay involved. So we will be sending out a recording, an email of this recording of this webinar to everyone who registered. We keep track of the questions, and we'll try and reach out from ourselves to the different people where possible to answer and follow up. And just wanted to let you know that our next Women Talking Policy is on September 17th. It's also a virtual webinar, and we have the Federal Lobby Commissioner, Nancy Beleger, coming in to talk about what lobbying is. And if you're an elected official, you will be engaged by stakeholders, so this process. What the reporting is, the goal is elected officials want to hear from their stakeholders and constituents, but sometimes there's some rules and transparency about it and what you need to know when you get into that. So you can ask all your questions then. And then obviously we have our spring in person and online, and we also have a specific Indigenous only campaign school every fall and spring. So please stay tuned, signed up for our newsletter so you can get involved in that way. And with that, thank you very much to our panelists and to everyone who was here. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to Equal Voice at info@equalvoice.ca. And thank you to everyone and enjoy your long weekend. I hope everybody gets some rest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.